Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Communicate. Thank you so much to everyone who has logged in this afternoon and joined us. My name is Savita. I'm director of the Natural History Consortium that is putting on this year's Communicate and has put the conference on since 2004. And I know that there's many of you here in the audience who have joined us previously. Some of you have even been to many Communicate conferences in the past, but a special warm welcome if it is your first time. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. It's great to see so many people adding their names and a bit about themselves. We have a DIY delegate list this year, so we'll put a link to that in the chat as well, where you can add your own details and any links that you'd like to share with the rest of the conference. If you are seeing some interesting things go by in the chat, don't feel you need to scribble them down or copy and paste them somewhere else. We will be capturing the chat from all of the sessions today and sharing that back to you. So the theme of Communicate this year is people, nature, and climate. And if you're a regular Communicate goer, you will know that we normally have one conference in the autumn each year. But this year, which is such a special year for the environment, we've actually decided to have three. So you are at part one of People, Nature, and Climate, and we do hope that you'll join us in September and November as well. The other special thing about Communicate this year is that it is taking part as part of Festival of Nature, which is the public event that the Natural History Consortium runs. So although we have a national event, there's people here from all over the country. We are really based right now within our Festival of Nature, which is run in the Bristol and Bath City region. So it feels like a great opportunity to take this opening panel and explore a little bit more about what's happening here in the Bristol region. I've got two really special guests to help me open today's conference. Now, the theme we really want to dig into this afternoon across all 11 sessions, ecological and climate emergencies. And we're going to be spending some time looking at how we tie up the narrative between the twin emergencies and how many of you are tackling them through lots of different campaigns, communications, and different kinds of programs. So a great opportunity for me to welcome my two guests, Ian Barrett, who is Chief Executive of Avon Wildlife Trust, which covers our region, and Councillor Nicola Beech from Bristol City Council. So Ian, if we can start with you, you were really instrumental in Bristol declaring an ecological emergency. And it would be really great to hear why you think that's an important framing and why that was an important step for Bristol.
Well, really pleased to say Bristol was the first city to declare a climate emergency 2 or 3 years ago now. And a lot of cities around the country, a lot of places followed suit. And that's fantastic to see the amount of energy and focus that's brought on tackling the climate emergency. But it was obvious that it was really only looking at half of the problem. Because we all know about climate change, and people have been talking about climate change for many years, but some of the statistics that have come out in recent years about how much we're losing of the wildlife around the world, 60% of wild vertebrates worldwide, 90+% of some bird and insect species in the local area. The pitch I really made to Bristol City Council and the partnerships, the One City partnerships, was that if we manage to tackle climate change, but our ecosystems fall apart, we're still screwed, essentially, to put it in plain English. So in order to catalyse the kind of partnership working and action that we're seeing on climate change, I kind of made the proposal that we should also declare an ecological emergency to bring that same focus and, focus on what we're going to do about it to the ecological side of the emergency as well as the climate side.
Fantastic. And, today we're going to spend a lot of time, Ian, on tying up this narrative as environmental communicators between the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. And I wonder, perhaps with your Avon Wildlife Trust hat on, you can say a bit about how we're playing that through in the region or some examples as well.
There's a big question. There's quite a lot going on. So clearly, part of what we're trying to do in this is to say it's not just about carbon. It's not just about reducing fueling cars or introducing neighbourhood heat systems. It's also about all of the things we need to do to keep our environment in healthy conditions. So stopping destroying habitats, linking up the remaining habitats through wildlife corridors, making sure that pollinators are still there to pollinate all our food, and that the whole range of ecosystem services is provided. So we've done quite a lot in the region to look at what we do around nature's recovery. So we've mapped our nature recovery network. We know the areas where we need to do some work. We're working on the projects to put in place to deal with that. And at the Bristol level, we produced a strategy last September looking at what we need to do as a city to tackle the ecological emergency. So we've got targets in there like 30% of land in the city being managed for wildlife. So some of that will be parks and green spaces, but others will be people's gardens or businesses, grounds and that kind of thing, where people start to manage land with nature in mind. We're looking specifically at pesticides and how we tackle the use of pesticides and the impact of that on wildlife in the city. And we're looking at our water quality and how we improve water quality. And we're looking at our global footprint, actually, which, we've not found many places that have done this so far, but it's not just about how we manage land in the city, but it's also about what our impact is on the wider planet. So, the 68% of wild vertebrate decline over the last 20 or so years worldwide, it's probably 40 years, that is to do with our buying choices and what we do as consumers and, where our business supply chains are. So that's another part of what we're looking at in the city. And coming back to your question, I think on, kind of how they interrelate, there's some absolutely shocking statistics came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change a year or so ago, saying that if the temperature rises by 1.5 degrees, we could lose 20 to 30% of species on the planet. So we know that we do need to tackle climate emergency as well as the ecological emergency. The two are inextricably linked but quite separate. It's we need to tackle both of them at the same time. So we're also looking at how we can use habitats to tackle the climate emergency. So by putting in place more trees, more wetlands, better managed grasslands, a whole range of habitats, it's not just trees, we can actually create better habitats for wildlife and lock up carbon. So that's something we're really quite focused on in the area over the next year or so.
Fantastic. And we're going to hear examples today from different cities, different organizations about, how some of these projects are happening all over the country, but also the communications and public engagement campaigns that have gone alongside them. So, Nicola, you're a councillor with Bristol City Council, and I know the Mayor has asked you to take on this new and really exciting cabinet post, which is covering ecology, climate, waste and energy. Which is quite a big brief and really, of interest to everyone here in an exciting brief. We're going to hear from one of the council officers, Alex Minshall, in a future session this afternoon with a bit more detail about Bristol's work to date. But I'm interested, from your perspective as a city leader, how do we join up some of this thinking and involve people as well?
Yeah, no, it's well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be here, and I think this conference is worth its weight in gold in terms of reaching the people that communicate these messages outwardly, and I think that is no mean later. So in terms, yes, I'm delighted to have my new role. So hello everyone, and it's nice. This is my second time I've been speaking about my new position. It's really nice to be here to talk about it, and it's a kind of pivot from my previous role in planning, but it's also incredibly aligned to the idea of planning for the next decade and actually bringing these really, really important subjects and quite natural bedfellows, energy, waste and environment and climate all together to really understand how perhaps sometimes the unseen parts of the city actually function and how we can make them function better for both those two shared emergencies. I think it's fair to say that Bristol needs to pull together and come together within the city and within the sub-region to create a fairer, healthier, more sustainable city, which is what our administration is all about. That can't happen by a single organisation. And I think the journey we've been on and working with Ian and many of the other partner organisations in the city is that it's naive and probably a bit of a fool's errand, really, to think that any one organisation can solve these challenges. one city kind of ethos and culture, and was born out of that idea that actually, you know, there's many levers to pull, but actually unless they're all pulling in the right direction and in kind of in a similar direction, you're not going to get the outcomes that we need to sort of support our city's future and create this we think is in grasp and we think is possible to do. I was really pleased last year in 2020 when Marvin declared the ecological emergency, and as Ian just touched on, we've been working since May. We've been working hard to put out our ecological action plan about what, as the council, I guess how we walk that. You know, what do we do? Spaces and our behaviours as a local authority to make sure that we fulfil our role as part of that city partnership and this declaration of the ecological emergency. I share some of Ian's view. So my kind of headline reflection 2 weeks into this post is that you really don't want biodiversity and ecology to be kind of the poor relation of climate. I think that there is a danger that could happen, and that's really why really cementing and crystallizing what it is that we are trying to do as a city in this space particularly is super important to actually make this work in terms of financing this and being really purposeful about it. I think even in some of the early feeling that this stuff will happen by itself, and I think we all know that's not true, and Ian more than anyone will know that that's not true. And so it's been an interesting fortnight coming into this role. I think there's you know, as a city, we've worked for many years to protect our green spaces. We're blessed with some amazing natural green spaces in our city, but in spite of that, we still face these ecological challenges. So we have all the kind of raw ingredients that we need to create the environment that we. But I think this is why declaring the emergency and now being purposeful about that will get us the kind of step beyond which we need to protect these species and allow our city to flourish in future.
And I know that so much of what you're saying will resonate with people in other cities, and we've got people from, you know, other local authorities here. But it's really exciting, you know, for us here in Bristol. It's the first time that we've combined our Communicate conference and our, you know, sector-facing work inside our Festival of Nature. So a bit of a plug if you're kind of looking at what else is happening this week. We've had over, I think, about 300 people come together to create 125 pieces of original content, which are going out as part of the Festival of Nature this week to local audiences. But we're already getting people joining from all across the country and across the world as well, which is really exciting. And I know that today is very much about sharing projects, ideas. Communicate's always a really great place. So this is a chance to feed into Bristol's plans as well as to hear from lots of different cities. Ian, it'd be great to hear some, you know, final thoughts from you as we start to think about the sessions that people want to attend today. You're Chief Executive of Avon Wildlife Trust, Chair of our local nature partnership, working with partners across the region and nationally. How do you think the environmental communication sector can work more effectively together?
It's a really interesting question. It's a really big challenge that we're facing, and we know we need to mobilise people on a massive scale in order to face it and overcome it. As we know that on the climate side, we know that on the ecological side as well. And the Wildlife Trusts nationally and locally are looking at how we mobilise that number of people with a kind of target of getting 1 in 4 people taking action for nature, because that's the kind of level where you begin to reach those societal tipping points where it becomes the norm. We've seen it with recycling, which 15, 20 years ago was something which very few people did, and now is normal. And we need to follow that kind of trajectory on the climate and ecological emergencies. So we're looking at how we can move beyond organisations talking to a few people to mobilising whole networks of people to take action for themselves and to provide that support, that empowerment, the information that people need on what for people to be able to self-organise and do things for themselves. And it feels like a time in wider society when we're moving from a kind of volunteer model where a few people get involved with a few organisations to much more of an activist approach where people are really beginning to understand the significance of take action. in marches, demonstrations, but also letting their grass, and all the other things, the actions that we need from people. So looking, I think, community to play and looking at how do we support level of action and change in society. Not just about individual action and the kind of things that Nicola's been talking. Cities, how do we design all our cities to make it easy for people to make the right choices? How tackle the climate crisis? We need neighbourhood heating systems, the ecological crisis, where we need access to green space for wildlife and more wildlife corridors. And Bristol's also facing a housing crisis. So, in order to be able to tackle all of those, we need to be around at how we design our city and how we're going to really transform things over the next 10, 20 years to hit 2050.
Oh, thank you very much. And Nicola, just, some final thoughts from you as an elected official. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on how environmental communicators in Bristol, but also, right across the country can work effectively with decision makers and, local authority teams in their area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm more than happy to touch on that. And I think, don't forget, before a fortnight ago, I was a citizen in this space, so to speak. And so I've kind of come into this asking questions left, right and centre about what the heck does this mean? What is a BND point, etc., etc. And I think from my perspective, we all know, anyone that engages the public or the media or citizens in any space really, that having a really clear, consistent message is key. And I think there's a lot of symmetry. There's 2 points really I want to make. First one is the symmetry between my previous role in planning in this world, is that if you're not careful, the subject can become the, and I think that's a real mistake. And so I think for me, the work that we need to do is to sort of pull away from quite complex messaging that can sit in the ecological and biodiversity space when you're talking about net gain and metrics and points and natural income calculators and all these are things that are really important. But if we don't bring the whole city with us, we won't bring anyone with us fundamentally at the end of the day. And so I think there is a huge task, and it starts with us at the local authority, in my view, about well, firstly, how do we know it's working? And secondly, what is it that's working? Because we encourage people, and we were all weekend with the amazing Festival of Nature, and we talked about that at the weekend, didn't we? About the small things that everyone can do. Whether you have a garden, if you have a window box, it doesn't matter what you've got. Everyone's got a little something that they can contribute. But to really see that pivot and shift, people need to understand that they're contributing to something larger. And I think conversely, I spoke a second ago about the risk that ecology becomes the poor relation of climate. But actually, I think in the biodiversity and ecology space, you can see it. Like, if you go to College Green in Bristol right now, you can see the amazing wildflowers right by the cathedral. And it's very, rightly so, because it's beautiful, and you can see the impact of those efforts very, very quickly. And actually in the climate space, we've done a lot of work on the clean air in recent years. It's quite difficult for people to understand why that is in the city's interest if they're not personally, or they don't perceive that they're personally. Does that make sense? And so I think the opportunity is huge for communicators in this space. It's, it's beautiful, it's visual, it's something people can very quickly see the fruit of their labour, as long as we can underpin it with a language that makes sense to everybody. And because, I've, as I say, naturally, how these metrics work is something that I've been plugging away at even in the last fortnight. And I've got to be honest, I'm not entirely the wiser myself right now. And so I think there's that the more we can do in that space, I think it would benefit this entire sort of effort and this shared value that we've got. Finally, I think a good example of that actually would be, I should say this because I'll get in trouble if I don't, is our Bristol Climate Hub that we launched. And so I put it in the chat, but I'll encourage everyone to go and look at it, because that's really our stab at helping people understand kind of this actions, or quite big actions, but the actions you can take to improve your own carbon footprint, and also to just live a more sustainable life. And I think there's the more we can cut through some of this and make just break it down, have some emotional intelligence attached to it, to sort of break it down into people's spaces, I think we'll stand a much greater likelihood of success.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to you both for setting up perfectly a lot of the themes that we're going to be talking about in this afternoon's sessions. So before everyone runs away, I just wanted to give a tiny little brief on how Hopin works and how the rest of the afternoon will work. So if you look down the left-hand of your side of your screen, you will find the kind of menu. The sessions will be going on. You can explore that, go to any of the sessions that you like. I'd really encourage you to visit the networking function. It's quite fun. You get kind of randomly matched with someone for a kind of 2-minute conversation. So it's a great way just to meet someone who you might not have spoken to. In the expo, you can find out a bit more about Festival of Nature that's happening and our other Communicate events. At our kind of larger Communicate events, that's where we'll have lots of other organisations, but we've kept it simple because we've only got an afternoon. On the right-hand side, do make sure you contribute to the chat. We'll be collecting that up, sharing it back with everyone. There's some polls to take part in, and also there's a button that says People, where you can direct message someone or one of our speakers if you'd like to make contact with them as well. So we will release you into Hopin, go and have an explore, get yourself into the next session. But otherwise, Ian, Nicola, thank you so much for bringing Communicate, really situating it here in Bristol with some local examples. And we look forward to a great afternoon.
Enjoy.
Thank you.